gardening and working on my sawmill, but never mind. It's not a class about beauty. So, and now I can spin this in 360 degrees. To make this work well, I don't want to hold this in space because my hands will move and shake too much. So I'm going to make a stand for the specimen out of my hands. And the way I do that is put my hands down on the platform, pretend this is the microscope, and I'm holding the specimen 4 fingers up. See how I've got all my fingers in a row? And why do I do that instead of the very comfortable thing like this? Is because a lot of times I have to look at a feature underneath. So now I can move it in all those directions because the microscope focus is going to be fixed at one place and you're never going to move it again. So it's going to be about at that height. And now when I want to change often very subtly, to see a character, I'm not moving it on a piece of cork and refocusing. I'm moving my hand up and down slightly. I'm pivoting. I can rotate that specimen to really move in on the character very efficiently, because a lot of times I need to see this, and then I'm done if you're checking something. So you don't want to position it because you're going to use up maybe 6, 7, 8 times the amount of time you need to identify something. You need to be really fast when you're dealing with thousands of specimens. So it's all about holding with your hand. And focus is a matter of just lifting the specimen or moving it to get wherever you want in focus. Let's see, was there anything else about hand holding things? I can't recall. Was there? I don't know. I think that's the basics there. So it's a little awkward at first, but with a little bit of practice, not a problem. And you'll save plenty of time as we go along. If I remember, I'll shift to let you know any additional little tricks like that. Okay, now we're going to contrast learning your bees with bird watching. Okay, when you are, all right, I'm gonna share my screen here in a second. So, but just think about this. This is a really important analogy. I might have mentioned it last time, but basically, if you're going to learn to count birds, you know, you're going to be a professional ornithologist, or you're going to be a birder or bird watcher, a couple things. One, you can't just walk outside with a pair of binoculars and expect to know all the birds. You can't even find them in the binoculars half the time. Second, after a while, you don't want to be lugging the field guide around with you. You have memorized, because you spent all kinds of time paging through that. You want to memorize the field guide because you got to see a bird, go like, oh, that's like something like a robin, but bigger. Oh, I remember, it's a scarlet tanager. So there's memorization involved and time. So same thing with bee. They're really emphasizing that you're not just picking up a key and then walking through the park here. So we have this thing that Claire is going to send out after this as part of the Bee Lab goodie bag for this session, which is, I'm sharing my screen now, going to desktop. Claire, tell me if we're not seeing the Bee Genera memorization chart. Are we good?
Got it.
Okay. All right. So this is going to come out to all of you. This is just the Eastern genera. You feel free to modify this, change it in any way, Eastern United States, I should say. Add to it, subtract to it, add your own notes. Doesn't matter. This is just a setup. So what you're seeing here, there's a genus Agapostumum. Let me back up. When you pick up a specimen over time, and this is where you want to be, you want to pick up a specimen and go, I know what genus that is. You have memorized things at the genera level, and then over time you'll memorize a lot of the individual species level IDs too. So it's just a matter of being confident and comfortable that the identification is correct. And so just like with birds kinds of things, there's a set of key characters that define each of the genera that are available for you to see. So we have, for example, Agapostumum, which we're going to cover here in a second. Here's some general categories. Look, it's bright green. That really separates out a whole bunch of stuff. It tells you whether it's common or not, family, tribe, if that's important. there's links to pictures through there. And then over here is the important thing. I'm going to skid this a bit over. This is the ID string. So this is the, let's call it the minimal set of characters that you need to see that will completely identify this species, this genus. So all I have to see is that it's bright, shiny race car green, so super green in at least the thorax, and that the rear face of the propodium has this, what we'll talk about, which is a clearly raised line, a carina around it. Boom, that's agapostumum. I don't need ultimately to then go through the guide. Right now, you should go through the guide because going through the guide gives you an idea of the identification space of all the different bee genera, and you're learning, right? You're paging through that field guide in some ways. Okay, this is coming to you. I just want to introduce that. I'm not going to show it probably anymore today.
Well, before you don't show it, Sam, I'd like to leave a room for if anyone has questions.
All right.
I will go back to allowing anybody to unmute, or you can put it in the chat before we move on. Just give everybody a second.
Mm-hmm. And Claire is watching the chat boxes too, so, and she, you can use her as your mouthpiece if you want to ask something right away.
Okay, people should be able to unmute should they desire at the moment.
Doesn't sound like there's any questions. Should I move on?
Yes, we will be sharing the Bee General memorization script by email. We have a nice packet to be coming out to you. And we also have a question. Has it been modified for specific provinces or US states?
No, you can, but for example, that core set of genera there, which is everything east of the Mississippi, pretty much go for almost every state in the east has all those genera. There are some exceptions. You know, there's some stuff that are only in a few of the states. They're uncommon, you know, almost by definition. So you could go into Discover Life and on the global mapper, which we talked about last time, and we can cover again some other time, and identify which of the genera are likely to be in your area or not, and then you can eliminate them. Additionally, for those of you who are not in the eastern United States, but might be in other parts of the world or just in the West, you can add your own genera to that with a little bit of investigation that will give you your, you know, memorization script, what you need to memorize to, you know, pull that particular genus Brachynomata from, you know, other species of bee genera in the West, for example. So yeah, you can modify it, but I haven't. It's just basically stuff east of the Mississippi right now. That'd be a good job. Claire, are you taking notes? We
Yes.
can add that, or we can make it a group project. You know, if you have something where you modify that for a big area, anywhere in the world or in the West, then send it to us, and then we can send that out to other people, which is, you know, we're a support group basically, and we would love to have that.
That'd be super helpful.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, we don't have any more questions, so you can move on.
All right, so now we're going to jump to the Discover Life guide, and to the genera guide, and use that in conjunction with seeing things under the microscope. And so just as a refresher, here we are in the Discover Life page, the home page. There's a couple ways you could go through ID nature guides to find the Apoidea page or the other guides like the genus guide, or you can just click on the bumblebee, which we're going to do. That takes you to the Apoidea page. And if you see here in relatively large letters, it says click here to jump to bee identification guides. We can do that right now, or you can just scroll down because it is not far away. So here is a listing of all the different bee guides that we've set up, and you can click on any of those. We're going to click on the genera guide, but we're now going to start introducing terminology too for the different bee body parts. And there's lots of different ways to cut that. You know, has been done differently over time. Different authors do different things. There's a very technical way, and then there is a less technical way. We have taken the less technical route. So there are the guides. The top of the page is there. You can just scroll down and you can click on any of these pictures. I'm just going to click on this one and print it out. And now you have a guide to the body parts that we generally use in the guides. So I'm not going to go through these individual parts. I will be pointing them out as we go through the guide as important, but here's a place where we have list what we do. So in general, we're using, if you go into the recent technical issue, you'll see a lot of these names like scutum and abdomen and thorax are replaced by a much longer and much more tricky to remember phrase. You know, our rule of thumb is that if we're using a term that most people should, experts or not, should be able to figure it out. So in this case, we're going to use terms like sort of inappropriate from a taxonomic point of view, terms like thorax, because everyone knows what the thorax is, and abdomen, even though they have different technical terms. So just be warned that we are not using I'm going to use my back button, terminology that's the latest. So if you were going to be publishing, you would not use these. You would use something else. But we're not publishing. We're trying to get you the answer to what bee you're looking at, which is a different approach. And we're trying to make it as easy as possible. So bigger tent. So now, here are the guides. We're going to be working on the workflow, which is, oh, I'm looking at something. Is it a bee or not? We'll talk about that in a little bit. Then I'm going to ask, what genus is it? And then I'm going to ask what species it is. In general, we skip over the family because the family characteristics are not sometimes that clear compared to the genera. And so it's just a step that almost every group jumps over. So there's only 6 families in North America and 7 in the world. Do I have that right? Or is it 5? No, it's 6 and then 7 in the world. Those references, but we're not going to use them. So when we click on the Genera guide, and you
Sam,
can be
real quick.
Yeah.
Just to confirm or deny for the group, does a particular genera, for example, Ceratina or Ceratina, as we are playing with, have the same characteristics across the world?
Oh, I want to say yes, but it may, some of the characters we use may work in North America, but yeah, like Ceratina might not for all the Ceratina subgenera that exist worldwide. So let me do an invitation to say that you should try it out in other parts of the world, and we can work with you to develop this exact same thing. In fact, you can take a copy of this bee genera identification Discover Life tool and make it into, you know, something from, you know, whatever part of the world you want. Southeast Asia, and you can add additional species. You can subtract out the genera in this case. You could subtract out the genera you don't want, and we can work with you on how to modify everything you see so that it fits your area, or keep some of the things that are useful. So feel free to get in touch with us about that. Now, here's a genera guide. I was going to say something. What was that? Well, maybe before we go into this, I'm going to show you a couple not bees and talk about them in a general way. They're surprisingly sometimes tricky. So some bees are very non-hairy because they carry their pollen internally, for example, or they're parasitic. And some wasps are incredibly hairy. And because bees really are wasps, it's a little bit murky sometimes. So I'm going to show you a couple things, and we'll show, pulling a specimen here, see if we can get that microscope working. And we'll cover this a number of times because it's not completely straightforward. So again, it's a gestalt a lot of times. Oh, that's not a bee, that's a wasp. You just have to start learning these things by looking at a lot of stuff. All right, so we are going to go to the microscope here, and appears to be working. And I'm going to dial down the level. I have a little Taphiid wasp here. Oh my God, look how incredibly filthy my hands are. All right, I'm gonna have to work on this. Otherwise, what will people say? So we are going to look at our little Taphiid friend here. And so the first thing to note here on this wasp is that it's got hairs, but it's not super hairy. It's got a pinched waist, which sort of separates it from the fly groups. It's got relatively thick, oh, let's see, I can use my cursor. It's got relatively thick and long antennae, and I don't know the number of segments in Taphiid, but in bees, it's always 12 or 11 segments in an antenna. And if it has more or fewer of them, it's not going to be a bee. But many wasps, and it could be the Taphiids are this way too, have essentially the same number of antennal segments. Depending on the wasp group, the venation in the wings can look pretty similar. There is the classic notion that all bees have hairs that are forked on them, whereas wasps do not. But it may be just a few hairs that are forked, and a lot of times that's tricky to see. So forked hairs are useful, but a really useful one is, if I can get this in focus here, I got to bring it down faster. I'm learning the microscope ways here. If we can get the hind leg in focus, is the rear basotarsus. So the rear basotarsus in wasps is about the same width. Wow, that is a lot of glare there. Let's see if we can knock that down a little bit. Okay, oops, I'll just put my hand there. So the basotarsus in bees, in female bees, is usually modified because that's where at least some of them are carrying hairs. Not hairs, pollen. I'm doing two things at once, which is not a good idea. Well, we're getting a lot of glare on that specimen. Let's see if there's something we can do about it. Should have tested things out on this specimen. Maybe we're a little bit better from this angle. Focus. See, this is the problem. Like if I were doing it with my hands, I would have had this done by now. You know, it's moving in and out. All right, so we're looking at here's the tibial spurs for this Taphiid, and these tarsal segments are all approximately the same width. So that's a really good indication. Again, probably not perfect on some of the bees. That might be true too, that we're looking at a wasp, not a bee. But a lot of times you'll just learn, oh, that's a Taphiid wasp. So I am going to set it aside for someone else to look at. Or you can send it off to different groups of people who are interested in their wasps. Okay, so we're going to pull that, and now we're going to go to the Genera guide here and walk through this a little bit preliminarily, and then we'll get into looking at an agapostum and trying to use the guide to key that out, even though we already know the secret shortcuts. Okay, so first of all, in this guide to the bee genera, this is a very inclusive guide. So this guide covers all the genera in North America, which officially would be the Caribbean, Mexico, and US and Canada. And it turns out that at least Ireland and Great Britain have the same, have a subset of this same group of genera. And I think only, what is it? I can't remember. There's one genus that they don't, that they have that we don't. Anyway, we've included that. People who use that can tell me how that's going and whether that's useful at all. I don't think anyone uses it because it's considered to be a North American guide. We tend to overscore. So in other words, if we see that a genus is in one country very close to the border of another, we'll include it in both countries because it may be that at some point that genus may show up. So this is not a guide to the genera of each of the countries or states. It's a guide to what we think might occur in each of those geographic locations. So be clear about that. If you want an actual list, you should talk to John Asher or go back to, like we talked about the last time, which is now up on the web, that talk, and look up the species maps and the species lists that he has compiled for countries and states. Well, actually, no, you can't look at states, but he can provide them. Okay, so next we have states and provinces, including islands and the states of Mexico, the provinces of Canada, and the two-letter abbreviations for locations in the United States, the individual states. So we're going to look at a specimen from Maryland. So we're going to click MD, which is the shortcut name for Maryland right there. And you can see, remember, for the green letters, 55 genera are known from Maryland or suspected. Again, some of these have not actually been documented, but could be in Maryland. So now when we do that, we click that and we click the search bar. This then refreshes this screen, and now we have a list of genera here that is thought to solely occur in solely the specimens, solely the genera, I should say, that are thought to occur in Maryland. You might remember that if you are looking at this list, it's very large right now, so I wouldn't necessarily do this, but so you know, you can say, well, I know it's not a coleoxys, so I can unclick it, and it is removed from the guide. So this is a very handy feature. If you have already understanding of what it's not, click them off. Okay, we can also hit simplify and come up with a new guide that would just be the genera of Maryland, but on this first page are a relatively small number of questions that help split out a lot of the genera in question. So usually I go through at least this before hitting simplify, because otherwise I get tons. So every additional genus on here is going to generate potentially a whole bunch more characters that I don't need to look through if I can eliminate them. So so we've talked about the state or province where it was collected. If you're on a border, no harm, just click both. Like, let's say I was on the border between Maryland and Virginia, click on Virginia too. That's fine. Countries, you can choose United States and Mexico if you wanted to. So for people who do know, like their families, here are the families. So you can click on, so we just show this, like, let's say, oh, I know it's in Coletidae. Why you know that, I don't really know, but that takes it down to only 2 species that are from Maryland and in the family Coletidae. And there's no harm while you're in the middle of it of clicking things on and clicking them off just to see what happens, right? So that's useful. Melididae, you go like, I wonder what Melididae are in Maryland. It turns out only 2, Macropus and Melita. So we can continue to play with that if we want. We also can go down to subfamilies, and if you knew those, and it's the same deal. Like if you know, oh, this is, you know, an Algochlorinae group, then you could click on that, and it would, like we can do that right now. It brings it down to only 3. So sometimes you know this, mostly you don't. and that's fine. So here you'll see a character that has no states. In other words, there's no place to click. This is just a reminder about how to tell males and females. And we're going to do that right now. Where's my hopefully not too shiny agapostumum here? Oh, let's use this one.
Well, you wait for that real quick.
Yeah.
I want to ensure that people can see right now the Discover Life guide.
Should I bump up the size like we did last time? The size
try
of
that.
Okay, let's do that. That's a good idea. Thanks, Claire. Okay, so males from females, we're now going to flip to, so there's multiple ways. Flip to the very bright again. How can we control that somehow? We had it under control before, Claire. Now it's like super bright. I wonder if I flip the background to white. Maybe better. Now it's seemingly dark. I wonder if we have to play with the camera lens. Anyway, here's agapostumum. I already know the answer, right? So we're pretending that maybe you don't know what you're looking at. We're looking at this. We're looking at several different features here. I am noting that it is bright, shiny green. In this particular light, it doesn't look as shiny as when I had the black light. I wonder if I do some modifying. Don't look at my fingers. There are, yeah, you can see the green a little bit better. Maybe I'll have a piece of paper. What if I put a piece of paper in here? Does that help? Maybe a little. Some more neutral rather than bright white, just to break things up. Now you look at my piece of paper. Okay, let's get a better chunk of paper underneath here. Okay, so we are noticing the color here as bright and shiny green. So that's a characteristic that is unusual. So it's going to eliminate a lot of specimens right off. So if we go here, oh, we were talking about males and females, first of all. Just to note that right now, it's not important in where we might go in the next couple of characters, but there are characters that are only appropriate for males, and there's characters that are only appropriate for females. So you need to tell them apart. All right, so that's what we were talking about. So we're going here and we're looking at the antenna as the classic and usually the best way to, we'll talk about several other things, to tell most specimens apart in the bee world. So if you actually had the little diagram of the bee parts, you would know that this first part of the antennal segments, so this is called, has a name, this is the scape, and sometimes it's used as a ruler. Length of the scape versus the length of, you know, some other feature on the antenna. This is the pedicel. So the pedicel is like a ball joint, right? So it's pivoting between the scape and the flagellar segments, which are up in that direction. So the rest of these are all flagellar segments of different kinds. And they usually are called, shortcut is F1, 2, 3. So flagellar segment 1, 2, and 3. And there is a lot of action in the bee identification world that is measuring the ratios of the length of these segments to each other and to the pedicel, sometimes to the scape. It just depends on the species group. Also, there's a lot that has to do with the width versus the length of the an individual segment. So that's important. But in terms of sexing them, first of all, in most species, once you get familiar with it, the scape is almost always a lot longer in females. So watch for that general character as a gestalt. But it varies by group, so it's not a given that this is a particular ratio. But in general, within a group, males and females, males are almost always have a shorter scape. And surprisingly, then the antennal segments are longer on males, perhaps because they have to detect more things. And in all but in the east, Holcopocides, which is a very obscure genera of parasitic bees, the overall number of antennal segments is 12 in females and 13 in males. And after some time, you can just eyeball very quickly the antennae and know whether it's a male or female. But at the beginning, and still to this day, I spent a lot of time counting antennal segments. And usually, so these are always the same. There's a scape, there's a pedicel. So you just count the flagellar segments. So you would, you know, have to train your eye to see one and then count to the next. And people find that over, you know, they get lost in the middle. Like, was that the fifth or the sixth one I counted? So you'll figure it out, but you know, you have to concentrate is the answer. It's not a very satisfying answer, is it? But that's how it works. Okay, so let's see if we can. The problem is that most of the time these are quite curved, so it's hard to show on here, but let's see what we can do. So get some focus a little bit better. So if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, hold that thought there, 9, 10, then pedicel, 11, scape, 12, female, confirmed there. Okay, so that's the, in lots of ways, the best way, because a lot of the other characters are either hidden or can vary across the genera and can be confusing. But counting antennal segments is really where it's at most of the time. So another general characteristic, the lighting on this seems to come and go. I'll have to look into maybe programmatically how to, should be able to click on that and get it to, I'm not going to try though. So I'm talking to myself now, which is probably not cool. But in general, within a genus, the females are more robust, so they're bigger, they're whiter, they're carrying stuff, they're carrying pollen. And the males are lighter, longer, have longer antennae, and have shorter scapes on them. In species that are not parasitic, they're carrying pollen. So this doesn't hold very well because about 20% of all the species in North America and probably worldwide are parasitic. So they're not carrying pollen, so they tend to move back to the wasp basic format. But in species that use pollen, again, with some exceptions like Hylaeus, you're going to find somewhere on that bee that they carry pollen. So those are called scopal hairs, and it varies. You'll see, hopefully we'll get, well, who knows how far we're going to get today, but you'll see on the legs or under the abdomen, and sometimes in a few other places, long hairs meant to trap pollen in some fashion. And so if you see that, you know, you know that that's pollen-carrying hairs, which is not necessarily obvious, and is really a learned thing. You go like, oh, well, that's a female because it has pollen-carrying hairs. The reality is, it's not useful until you've gone through a lot of genera and have a general sense of how long of the hairs within a genus are appropriate for pollen collecting hairs, because some males and some genera have hairs longer than this, but they're males. The females are crazy bushy though. So you would know, oh, I'm looking at a Melisodes, oh, that's clearly, for example, that's clearly a male, even though it has quite a bit of long hairs. Here in this Agaposmon, these are long hairs, making it clearly a female, but you might not know whether that's long hairs or short hairs for that genus. In this case, it's long hairs for Agaposmon female. Another way that is theoretically always available, but surprisingly tricky sometimes, is abdominal segments. So 6 in females and 7 in males. So when we're looking at the upper surface, they're tergites. and the lower surfaces are called sternites. They're separate segments in the abdomen. So there should be 6 in the female. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is all we can see. This is where we get into these sort of problems. Let's see if I can hold this, which is that, or do I have that wrong? Is it, I don't even use this character, this is why I'm probably poor at it. The males have, trying to hold this, maybe the females have 5 and the males have 6. That's probably right. Anyway, so reverse what I said, or ignore the 6 as females. It should be 5 for female. But the problem is that a lot of times these segments get accordion in. So the males in particular will take some of their segments and the last ones and pull them in. So it's not clear whether you're looking at 5 versus 6 segments. We get into more and more details back here at the rear end of the specimen. And I'm trying to plug this in a way that will show. And oops, where is that? And we can't see, but this, for example, in Agaposmin, this little strange pygidial area there is characteristic of females. But you would have to know that because this is not a character that crosses over all the different genera. If you saw a sting poking out, you would know immediately it's a female. Okay, but the problem is, as in this one, we can't really see a sting because it's probably retracted completely in. It's not either all out or all in. And a lot of times you can see, particularly if you hold it at a different angle, you'll see a little piece of the sting. So for example, that right there could be a sting. I'd have to turn it around to take a look. But if you see a sting and it's clearly a sting, then female. If you see genitalia, I'm sure we'll see a number of different features that are genitalia. At some point, you will know that's a male. So in this particular case, everything points to female, but mostly I'm going to be looking at the antennal segments unless I already know the basic vibe of the species group. Okay, so now let's go back. So that's just an introduction, and this will be covered over and over again as we go through regarding, oh, that is, look at how incredible, like my fingers are incredibly dirty. Who knew about this part of it? Claire, you didn't warn me.
We already knew this. Okay. I'm going to hop in with that tergite situation. Yeah. Females 6, males 7.
Okay, so like I could not even find the 6th one in that. That's what I thought originally, but then it's like, where is it then on that Agaposmin? This is why I don't use it, because a lot of times they're hidden or retracted or partially covered. But thank you, Claire.
And while we have a second, okay, because we do have 17 minutes left, I want to jump into these 2 questions that are relevant to what you were just showing. Yep. Pedicle seems to have two parts. One is very small. Can you show the antenna again?
Yep. So what was the question specifically?
The pedicel seems to have 2 parts. One is very small. Hess, if you want to elaborate on that question, you are welcome to unmute.
Right, and this goes for these, if I understand, this will also go for the, I'm going to see if I can really dial this up, the scape 2. So if we look at that, let's start with the scape. It's the same idea. What else is going on there maybe? So here at the base here, this is the scape. This thing, I don't know what its name is, but it doesn't count. How about that? And it shows up differentially. So that is not considered to be part of the antenna segments. It's another ball joint thing, but for whatever reason, it's never counted. I think largely because there's not a lot of variation in that. I know of no guide at any level that uses this. However, this antennal socket or fovea or fossa, I think sometimes is called. Here, the opening here, that's a great tool and is used a number of times. So it has a width that is pretty easy to measure in a comparative way. So rather than have a measuring tool, which people use, but mostly we avoid because most people don't have a measuring tool under their microscope. But you can use this width as a tool, like how many diameters of that is the specimen, the width between here and there. It's, maybe 2. And that gives you an opportunity to use that. Even more so up here, the ocelli are used an awful lot as measurements. So you would have the diameter of the ocelli, and you talk about distance to the back of the head, or distance to the eye often, or distance between the ocelli in terms of number of ocellular widths. Some of my terminology is just stuff in my head, so you'll have to pardon the fact that I need to be corrected, and people can put those corrections into the chat group so that I don't mislead people.
So it could be that I'm seeing a reflection or something in the pedicel, because it looked like there was the pedicel, and there was this little teeny part. And I said, that can't be.
You mean this right here?
It's hard to see this.
I'm about as magnified as I can get there.
Yeah, I know. So, all right, if that's because I can't see.
Yeah. That's I think that's straight reflection. I think that's just a curve.
Okay, all right.
It's possible that you can at times under certain conditions, maybe when the antenna has been partially damaged, see something else in there. It might look like a collar, but that in particular, what we're looking at here, let's bring the other one in focus too here, is just reflection. So here's the other pedicel. Again, there's some reflective space, but this is the pedicel right there. This is the pedicel right there. This here is just some reflection.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so because a segment, well, a segment, that's not the word, a flagellar segment will look like a segment. It won't be tiny, teeny. Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Well, some species, like Anthophora, has notoriously long flagellar segments. The longhorn bees, the males, have really, extensively long flagellar segments too. So, but they're always in the same position. Scape, pedicel, like there's no exceptions to scape, pedicel, flagellar segments. The only exception is a count exception in that Holcopocides, both the males and females, have only 12 total antennal segments, so 10 flagellar segments instead of 10 versus 11 in the rest of the genera. It's almost worth not even mentioning because so few people come across the Holcopocides. Oop, I seem to have lost control. Oh no, there we go. Okay. Let's go back to the genera guide so we can get into this. So here, this question right here, thorax primary color. You have a variety. Here's bright, shiny race car green. Well, that's a very good description, even though the lighting wasn't great, of that specimen. But over here, so other colors, black, yellow, brown, clearly not that. But here it's like, blue, green, or dark green, usually dulled by a rough surface or inscribed microscopic lines. You might, with your beginning, you might go like, I'm not sure. So if you click just this one, you'll see it's down to those 6 in Maryland. But you might, to play it safe, you might click both, which is always a good approach because you can always go back and unclick it or start the guide over without that. But now you see that actually you have 6 with 1 and the combined is 13 if you're playing it safe. So why not play it safe? And so the next one is thorax and outer abdomen markings. Okay, not the hair color. These are the actual markings or maculations, we might call them, on thorax and the abdomen. Okay, so there are bright yellow, white, or red markings, or none. Entire body is brown, black, metallic, or abdomen alone red. So we meet that definition. there are colors, like green is a color. Actually, they're all colors, right? But not these yellow, white, or red markings. So we fit that one, and we didn't really do much, right? We're still at 13. So this character, you can see a lot are scored for that, is the same as up here. I should also note that since we're working at a general level, if any one of the species within a genus has both of these characters, like 99% of the species are all black, but one of them has a bright yellow spot, they're scored for both because they're both in the genus. So a lot of these categories are very broad and may not reflect your specimen, but again, we have to be inclusive of every species within the genus. Okay, axilla shape. So axilla is something that people get tricked up about. Let's find the axilla on our picture. Claire, how are we doing for time? What do we want to do here?
We have 10 minutes. I was going to let you get through that first page, particularly since the axilla is, well, we don't have one on this species.
Oh, no, we do.
And I have 2 questions in the stack.
We actually do have an axilla. It's just not pointy.
Okay, good point.
All right.
Why don't we wrap up with this trait, since the wing cells,
yeah,
maybe are more obvious.
Yeah. Well, these are good because we're actually we are actually going through lots of learning about the characters, which is what you want to do with a known specimen, is use that to differentiate what's going on. So here's the scutum, this big segment, the big segment that almost you always pin through is the scutum. The next segment is the scutellum, metanotum is there, and then the propodial triangle, but these are not good views. I'm trying to get a view of the axilla here. The problem is everything is very shiny, and this might be a good view. It's not a classic axilla, but if you bear with me, here's a scutellum. This area right here has sutures that separate it from the body of the scutellum. So plates, remember this is exoskeleton, so there are suture lines that separate different segments of plates. And it's difficult to see here. We'll see plenty of examples where it is obvious. This is the axilla, but the thing to note is it's not sticking out into space. It's not a point out in space. It's conforming to the edge of the metanotum. It's just tucked in there tight and has no spaciousness to it in terms of pulling away from the sides. And if we look at the character here, axilla end projecting out of the rear scutellum as a triangle spine or rarely rounded over. And then the other one is that the rear margin is tame, which is one we looked at. We can click on these pictures and see a little bit better. There's the axilla. This is the situation of most species. That axilla is always there, but it usually just is flowing with the metanotum. You can ignore those points. It's different species. Group, if we look at the species like Epeolus and Coelioxys and a couple others, you can see only 11 and all around North America that are projecting out. There's little points, and they become very obvious. The condition of them not pointing out is not so obvious because they are defined by suture lines. So if we click there, because it's tame, we still have 13 because axillas pointing out do not occur in any of these groups here. All right, wing, just to wrap up, we're going to do this without looking at things, but we'll come back to these so that we don't go over time. Here we have submarginal cells. Maybe we should stop because it would be nice to see all these characters. We're basically out of time. So let me just point out a workflow here, and we'll come back on the next one and look at these characters more specifically. But you can see most genera have members, at least one member that has 3 submarginal cells. This one has 3 submarginal cells. It did knock out a few. We're down to 10. Now, if we look at this basal vein, this is a character for most, but not all, of Halictidae. So, and this is one that confuses people. What you're looking for is the basal vein, and we'll show this here. Here is a basal vein right there. That's the basal vein. There's a submarginals, and so we're just concentrating on this. It's not, in some species, it's absolutely straight. Like here, you can see this is pretty darn straight, but a lot of them have just this gentle arch. Okay, that is the not bent one condition. Here is the bent condition that a lot of Halictidae have. So you can see it goes along and then it takes this really sharp, often almost right angle. The Nomiini are kind of the exception to this. So I'm not saying it works for everything in Halictidae. And if we look further down here, here's a, in fact, that's an Agapostumon. There it is, down like that. So if we had time, we would look at this on our screen, the microscope. Now we're down to 6 kinds. I'm going to skip over jugal and vannel lobes. It's not used that much once you have some experience. It is a thing that separates out different groups, but the power of something like this is you can say, I don't really like looking at that because often the hind wing is messed up. If we look at the aurolium, the pad between,
Beep, beep, beep.
all right, we're gonna
cut
stop.
you off.
All right,
So,
we're stopping there.
The 2 questions that I have don't need the microscope really.
Okay.
Curious about the pronunciation of genera and other names. Are there big differences between American and Canadian, British, etc.? And do you know an online source for hearing the pronunciations? And we'll get some opinions in the chat.
All right, so the big difference is between probably the English-speaking world and the Spanish-speaking world. So my impression, and people can jump into the chat, is that in the Spanish-speaking world, they're using a very, just like the language, very straight ahead Latin pronunciation for all these groups. And the English-speaking world, of course, being nonconformists, are all over the place. So in general, there's no official way. There's just like I learned it a certain way, other people did it a different way. I have a link, and we can try and find this, Claire, to a MP3 file that you could play, just like a podcast, where I pronounce all the different genera as I learned them. And
I think it might also be in the back of the Handy Bee guide.
Yeah, I think probably. Oh yeah, they're right. There's the phonetic pronunciations in back of the Handy Bee manual.
Okay, our other question, this was when you were going over sexing the bees.
Yeah.
Isn't it also the case that for some genera, i.e. Osmia, that the female is conspicuously larger than the male?
Yes. And that's very comparative, right? So you would have to know what species you're looking at. You would have to have a collection of males and females. But over time, again, you can use that as a characteristic. But other groups, don't do that. Like a lot of the, at least some of the Anthidiums, the male is larger than the females. And there's probably a couple other, but that's the general rule. But within a species, if you look at a collection, you'll see that for whatever reason, there's often a lot of size differences among specimens. So yes, and maybe not super useful until you have lots of time under the belt.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left. Is there any burning questions? I'm super proud of us for being on time.
Good job, Claire.